Good morning, team, and welcome to the Taazaa webinar on Agile, Scrum, and Servant Leadership. My name is Jeff Ferguson, and I'll be your presenter for the next 2 hours. The purpose of this webinar is to share information of Taazaa's viewpoint on Agile, Scrum, and Servant Leadership, and the mindset behind Agile, the delivery framework that we use that provides consistency in planning and incremental development of value. Our hope is that you'll find this information useful, whether you're starting you've run into problems with your existing development and delivery. This will help to provide some insight or possibly be a starting point for you. What we talk about here, some of this information could be cursory to some of you if you've already read through the Agile manifesto, the Scrum guide, read something on servant leadership. But we all know as well that there's reading and then there's implementing, right? And the difficulty comes in with implementing. Who am I? My name is Jeff Ferguson. I am the Senior Agile Practitioner for Taazaa. My roles include Agile Coach, Mentor, Certified Professional Scrum Master, Certified Professional Product Owner, Release Train Engineer, Facilitator, and Trainer. I've got more than 30 years of experience in IT, started my career as a developer, developed software back in the early days, C, C++, Visual Basic, .NET, using SQL Server, transitioned over to a business analyst for about 3 years, and then found Scrum, found Agile, the Agile mindset, started being introduced to it. My first transition was as a product owner for a Scrum team. That helped the introduction. And I knew there was something different about this delivery model than anything I'd done in my career before this. So for the last 15 years, though, I've acted as a coach in some form or fashion, either as a Scrum Master, an actual Agile coach, or a team member within a Scrum team. My passion is helping organizations, whether it be operations or an actual Scrum team, understand how delivering in an incremental fashion using Agile, the Agile mindset, using Scrum as a delivery framework can impact the value that they deliver on a regular basis. Our topics that we're going to cover today include Agile values and principles, the Scrum framework. We're going to do a quick review of the framework, the Scrum values, and we'll talk about too how those Scrum values and the Agile values intersect. Pillars of Scrum, Scrum roles, the roles involved in Scrum, the events surrounding the delivery framework, strategic planning. We'll talk about some strategic planning and some controversial issues within strategic planning. And then last but not least, servant leadership and the role that plays and encompasses in all of this, the Agile mindset and the delivery framework that we'll be talking about. Given the amount of information that we're going to be going through within this next 2 hours, is a short period of time for a lot of information. I ask that if you have any questions, that you jot them down in the Q&A section, and then we'll hold off for the last 20 to 30 minutes, depending on the number of questions, to respond to those as best we can. If there are more questions that we can't get to, I'm more than happy to have you reach out to me, or I can reach out to you and for a more detailed discussion. Agile values. So Agile values are what help to drive the mindset, right? What we're looking at are the 4 values that drives Agile. And the most important part here is that we need to take away that the first part of these statements, of each of these four statements, for instance, well, let's start with the first one, individuals and interactions over processes and tools. While processes and tools are important in the delivery framework, we value from an Agile perspective more our individuals on our teams and the interactions that we have with them. Not that processes and tools are not important, they are, but our team members and our interactions with them, we value more. Same goes for the next three values, working software over comprehensive documentation. Again, comprehensive documentation is important, but first and foremost is working quality software. That's what we value most from an Agile perspective. Customer collaboration over contract negotiation. This particular value is contained within Agile. We're not talking about the negotiations between a consulting firm and a client. What we're talking about here is the contract negotiation of the work request to the development team. As we get into our discussion of Scrum, we'll talk more about what that contract is and who specifically are we talking about in that transaction. But customer collaboration and how we work with them from an Agile perspective, from an Agile mindset, is much more important to us than those contract negotiations. And responding to change over following a plan. We definitely want to have a plan, sprint over sprint. We want to have a plan, and actually we want to have a strategic plan. We want to have a roadmap, a visual representation of what is going to provide value to our product or our project as we move forward through our delivery, say over the next 2, 4, 6 months. We want to have that roadmap in place, but we do respond to change. That is not a free-for-all, but changes and immediate changes should be more the exception, not the rule. So the Agile principles, there are 12 principles. If you haven't read the Agile Manifesto, simple read, 1, maybe 2 pages, which encompasses the values and these principles. I won't go through each of these principles, but I will talk to a few of them that stand out to me first and foremost. The most effective way to communicate is face-to-face. Given today's workplace environment, in some cases it could be difficult to do face-to-face, except on a medium like this. But in any way, shape, or form, it's always better to try to communicate face-to-face with our team members, our peers, our customers, as best we can. Welcome changing requirements even late in the project. Key phrase there to me is late in the project. As we talk about Scrum, we'll start to talk about our iteration and what it is we're planning to deliver within that iteration. There are times when we may have to accept changes in that iteration. We'll talk a little bit about how we do that. But late in the project or in the product, that goes to me directly back to our roadmap discussion. That if we have sprints, let's say in 1, 2, and 3, and something of value has shifted for the business, and that new value is needed within sprint N+3, we're happy, as long as we have definition of what that is, happy to shift those priorities, give the team a head start, give them a runway to understanding what the work is that's coming towards them. This one, working software is the primary measure of progress, relates right back to our value of working software is much more important. Self-organizing teams generate most value. This one can get confusing, and I've said historically in some of the boot camps that I've taught that both the Agile Manifesto and the Scrum Guide for a Scrum Master or for a coach, there are best friends and there are worst enemies. If you only read those documents once, that's a mistake. 15 years later, I can read those documents And based on the experiences I've gained over some of the product teams that I help support, something different stands out to me. Nothing has changed, but something different stands out to me. Self-organizing teams, a lot of teams will take that to mean that they get to pick and choose who their team members are on their specific teams. What this actually means is, and we'll get to this when we're talking about Scrum specifically, teams are empowered to determine what work they can bring in. They negotiate that with their client, the product owner, and they get to determine how best to deliver that work that they've accepted into the sprint. Simplicity is essential. One of the key points in my boot camps is we always want to try to remove as much complexity from work when we're doing our refinements, when we're looking at the work. If it at all possible, we want to first understand what the work request is. We want to remove any dependencies around that work, internal, external, at least identify so that we know what might impede or block us going forward. We just want to make the stories or the work requests as small as possible in complexity to reduce the chance. We want to always put ourselves and our teams in the best position to succeed, not to fail. Now we're going to get into the Scrum framework. Scrum framework is simple. It is based upon empiricism and lean thinking. The empiricism part of Scrum says that we will do work, and we're going to learn as we do. We're going to identify challenges that we run into with our processes, our standards. And as we run into those challenges, we're going to go back and tweak and change those as needed. Worst case scenario, where Scrum does limit us to a minimum or a maximum of a 30-day cycle. Worst case, we've run into multiple challenges. We reduce the risk that we take on within 30 days. Most teams that use Scrum are using within a 2-week cycle or 2-week sprint. But the key here is that the teams learn from their development process and the errors. Even if they do things well, it's a discussion point. Lean thinking Scrum says, we will go, and as we work through these processes, much like developers will go and want to change code to remove any waste. If we've developed a process that's 6 months old and there's been business shifts and that process is no longer valid, we need to go back and remove any waste. Anything that adds complexity, there we go again, complexity to the process that doesn't deliver value. We're going to talk about Scrum values now. We've spoken about Agile values. We're going to talk about Scrum values. These are the values that we want our team members to follow, that this should be second nature to them. If we want to motivate our teams and our team members to deliver regularly, to deliver quality, these are the values that help us to get to that point. We want them to focus on the work of the sprint and the goals of the sprint goal itself. We should always have a sprint goal. That's our North Star. That determines what's the driven value that we're trying to get to at the end of this iteration. We want team members to have the courage to do the right thing. Have the courage to say, as we get into our planning sessions, as we get into our refinement sessions, as we get into the sprint, that raise your hand and call out any actions that might put us at risk. We want our team members to feel comfortable being able to exude and say, hey, this is not right. We're missing something here. Respect. We always respect our team members. One of the things I always talk about when when I'm coaching teams and we're in our retrospective, which we'll talk about a bit here, but this is where the teams get together and talk about any process changes, anything they've identified. Everything is on the table to discuss, but we do not attack our team members. I learned something from a VP that I did some work with a few years ago. He taught me that from his perspective, every team member that comes into this organization to do work every day comes in with the will and the desire to do the best job they can. And as leaders, it falls on us to make sure that they have the teams and the processes, the tools and the processes to do the work properly. That being said, we always want to respect our team members, remain professional. If there's a challenge with something that was done by a team member, don't jump to the team member and start blaming that team member. Look at the process. Was there a process that they were following? Is that process incorrect? Did they ask for help and nobody shared any information? Let's look at the processes and how we can help our team members rather than pointing fingers and blaming. Openness. This goes right back to what I said earlier about the courage, right? We want team members to be open about the work, any challenges that go with that work. Raise your hand. They should feel comfortable, empowered to come to leaders or come to their product owner or scrum master, squad leads, and say, hey, I have a problem with this. I don't understand why we're taking this path. And then there's the commitment to achieve the sprint goal. And that's defined in an earlier event that we'll talk about. Now we're gonna talk to the pillars of Scrum. They're transparency, inspection, and adaptation. The one that I always coach heaviest on is transparency. It's very important, one, for our team members to feel empowered that they can communicate, good, bad, or indifferent. They have to be able and be comfortable. If we want to understand what's happening, if we don't empower them to have those comfortable conversations and sometimes uncomfortable conversations, if they're not empowered to do that, they'll just stop sharing, pull off into a corner. Inspection talks about the team's ability to inspect any process changes. And we'll get to this as we talk about the events, but teams have multiple opportunities, formal opportunities to inspect their processes or things that have gone wrong. There's one central event, but there's multiple opportunities. And adaptation provides the team the ability to make immediate changes. And this kind of goes hand in hand with inspection. Let's review what we've done. Is there a problem? And let's adapt. Let's make changes as needed. We're going to shift over to the roles within Scrum now. We have the Scrum team, which are all the players on the team that will deliver or play a role in delivering work. Consists of the Scrum Master, the product owner, and the developers. From the Scrum perspective, all titles outside of the product owner and Scrum Master are developers. You are a team member. The developers are made up of cross-functional skill sets, any skill set that's needed to deliver an increment of work. Could be a developer, could be a QA, could be a business analyst. Any skills, it could be a DBA, any skill set necessary to deliver within that, what's been accepted in that increment. Those are team members, those are developers. The product owner is the single person that gets to determine what derives value for the product or for the project. That person, he or she, interacts with stakeholders and the Scrum team. They are not the boss of the Scrum team, but they help to provide guidance on delivering value. They negotiate, they work with the developers to determine what this work is that we're doing, this work request is that we're doing, what's the value behind it that's going to deliver value. And then they also negotiate with the developers on if this amount of work can get done in the increment. The misconception, I think, for a lot of people is that the product owner comes in with a pile of work and says, here it is, that's what I need. And there's no negotiation, there's no discussion. We'll talk about that a little bit more. And then there's the Scrum Master. Again, Scrum Master is not the boss, but more the coach who helps the Scrum teams understand the philosophy, the knowledge around what Scrum is, how it should be implemented, right? Provide guidance. Scrum Master does not have all the answers. Myself, 15 years of doing this, coaching teams and organizations on the operational side and on the IT side. 15 years of doing this. Depending on the product team that I'm helping to support, I could learn something from each and every one of those squads, something new. And if you think that you know everything there is to know about Scrum, I suggest that you reassess. All right, so we're going to talk about Scrum events now. This is where it gets good. This is where we talk about how we deliver within a sprint. There is another portion that we don't have time to get through, which talks about scaling of Scrum. One of the first classes I took on scaling, the facilitator said, this is tough. Scrum is difficult. Scaling is tough. And if you don't have to scale, then don't. But I have helped multiple teams scale at a large level. For the most part, we've been successful. So the Scrum events. We have the sprint. As it says here, this is the heartbeat of Scrum. Has a fixed length. I mentioned earlier that we reduce the risk of something going wrong within a sprint because a sprint should not be more than 30 days. Most teams limit to 2-week increments. And then you further reduce your risk that what's being developed, the value on that from the product perspective has shifted. So if you spend 2 weeks on it and it, for some reason, it's no longer valuable to the product, we've only lost 2 weeks. We haven't lost 6 months or 12 months developing something, getting stakeholders and project managers to sign off on something, and then sending them through a whole nother process if there is a change. That goes back to the strategic vision or the roadmap, right? Sprint planning. Sprint planning is the event where I mentioned earlier that the product owner gets to come in with valuable items that they've deemed, after discussing with the stakeholders, they've deemed that these work item requests will bring value to the product if delivered in the next 2 weeks or the next 3 weeks, depending on what that delivery framework looks like, that delivery timeline. Things that come up in this event. Why is this sprint valuable? What work can we get done? And then the teams are empowered at this point to determine how they're going to get the work done. So the product owner should come in with this work, talk about the value that's being driven by delivery of this work. And then there's that negotiation between the developers on the team and the product owner about how much work can fit in the iteration. And then the team says, okay, we can get this done. Now the team takes that ownership of those work request items. They own it now. They determine what the best way to deliver on these work items. They identify any dependencies. They don't identify any blockers, any known blockers. That's part of that negotiation too. Why would you bring in something that's already blocked? And we know it's blocked. If we take that in, we're putting ourselves in a position to fail, not to succeed. The daily scrum. A lot of people talk about the daily scrum. They reference the daily stand-up. Same thing. Scrum guide says the daily scrum. Time box to 15 minutes. And there used to be the period, the 3 questions that we used to talk about. What did you do over the last 24 hours? What are your plans to do for the next 24 hours? And do you have any impediments or blockers? Ideally, if the team is productive and they're doing the work, all I truly care about as a Scrum Master, and I coach teams on this, are there any impediments? Are there any blockers? Impediments being anything that slows you down from getting your work done. Blockers, anything that stopped you from actually getting work done. And the third question I coach teams on asking, how are we as far as delivering towards our North Star? Are we on target to deliver our sprint goal? Teams should know that. They should understand that. We'll get into some of the reporting and that can be done to help teams understand that. Sometimes you get so close to the forest, you can't see the trees. But there's reporting, there's ways to show teams during the sprint, hey, we've not made any movement. We have all this work backed up here and nothing's been completed and we're halfway through. Present that to them. Again, don't criticize, don't bring the hammer, but bring that information, share that information with them. Let them determine what the challenges are. Sprint reviews. Sprint reviews are now, okay, so stakeholders understand the work that's been asked to bring value to the product, and that's going into the sprint planning. The product owner has worked with the development team to determine what items are actually going to be involved or included into the sprint. The sprint review then is where the developers have completed the work. Everything has been done as far as they can get done. And now they're going to present that work to the stakeholders and the product owner. It's a showcase of this is what we've done. Teams should take pride in the completion of their work. This is not a place where stakeholders should come to say, check, pass, no go, we don't want that. And that is because, again, we've had a 2-week increment. Anything that's in that sprint should not be a surprise to the stakeholders or the product owner. We've had communication all through the 2-week increment. So this is what we promised you. This is what we've done. You see it. What I love to tell teams that should come out of the sprint review is that stakeholders or product owners should get excited about what they see and come up with new ideas. Now that I see this, can we add on? Can we expand? Absolutely, we can. That's the shift in priorities, the shift in requirements, right? We take note of that. We create new work item requests. We put that out for the product owner to then start to include that in the roadmap somewhere based on the needs and the value. And then there's the sprint retrospective. I love the sprint retrospective. This is where the creativeness of the teams actually comes into play. This is where teams should feel comfortable coming out to say, these are the challenges that we face during the sprint. Either we as a team can make changes to mitigate those challenges going forward, or these are challenges that are outside of our scope. We have no control over those. We want to send those up via the product owner, via the Scrum Master, but it needs to go to leadership so that we can mitigate this going forward. We don't want to see these challenges anymore. And it's something that we can't, as a team, can't control. We can control our processes. We can control what we do. We can refine code reviews. We can refine our coding standards. The QAs can refine how the work is being done. I've had a team that had challenges with, and this is a tracking thing, but the teams were comfortable with it once they understood what it was for, is to help them visualize and see what this work is, not to send up to leadership to provide some hammer to hit them over the head with, but they had a challenge with developers would finish the story, QAs would get the work, test it, and then there was a 2 or 3 to 1 ratio for every story that went through. QAs would create 2 to 3 bugs. We tracked that because we knew there was an issue. We showed that to the team in the retrospective. They came up with solutions on how to rectify that. As part of all of this, we have to make sure that we level set expectations. Whether if we're doing sprint over sprint over sprint, or we're looking more at a scaled version, especially scaled version, we have to level set expectations. Short story. I've got a new electric vehicle. And one of the challenges with this is that it takes a little more planning when you're going to do a trip of 500 miles or more compared to like an internal combustion vehicle. I'm talking about this only because, much like delivering a product, there's prioritization, there's planning around that, and then there's delivery of the forecasted within the forecasted timeframe. My wife was used to, hey, we use Google Maps. Google Maps says we'll get there in 3 hours or 5 hours. The reality of using an electric vehicle, again, if it's more than 500 miles, is we have to stop to charge. We get to the charging station, all the chargers are full, or half the chargers don't work. And now we're charging at a slower rate. We had to level set those expectations between what she was thinking and me. I was thinking, hey, this is a new experience. This is an experiment. Let's play with this. Let's see how this goes. And needless to say, until we level set those expectations, there are a few heated debates, discussions, but we survived it. We level set expectations. And now we both know she will actually say, okay, we need to add on, if it's more than 5 hours, you need to add an extra hour to an hour and a half if it's 500 miles or more. When planning products, there's no easy button, right? We talk about a roadmap. I mentioned a roadmap. Roadmap is basically, and we'll talk to this a little bit later, it's an idealized visual representation of work that the product owner and the stakeholders think will bring value over a period of time to the product. It starts there, it doesn't end. Once you get the pretty picture up and you got the pretty colors and the dates assigned, it doesn't stop there. There has to be continuous collaboration on delivery of what is valuable. And when can that be delivered realistically? Scrum as an agile delivery model provides us that planning and that incremental value of delivery of value. We're going to talk about the sprint backlog. So the sprint backlog is what the teams have agreed to bringing into the sprint. That negotiation between the product owner, singular, and the developers as part of the planning. It should be composed of a sprint goal, our North Star. We deliver all these work items. What's the value of that delivery? The work items that are being completed or included into that sprint. And Third bullet there says the development team and the product owner have negotiated the work items to determine their scope without affecting the sprint goal. Teams come up with an actionable plan for this work, because here's another tidbit, that the sprint backlog itself, once all those negotiations are done, that sprint backlog is owned by the developers. It's created by the developers and for the developers. Therefore, if any emergent work is to come into the sprint, that is another negotiation point between the developers and the product owner. There are methods that it can be included, but it's not just once the team commits to X, whether it be stories, story points, apples, cookies, whatever they committed to during that period of time, they've accepted responsibility for that. They didn't accept responsibility for that, plus whatever else you can bring in. Again, put our teams in a position to succeed, not put them in a position to fail, not overextend them. Teams should not be working 60 hours plus hold your weekends available. There's a different level of motivation that comes with that. You might be motivating them to look elsewhere, not remain here and be happy. We're going to talk about strategic planning within Scrum. This shifts a little bit when we're talking about scaling Scrum. The model of scaling that we use is called Nexus. And I'll leave you with that. We'll talk a little bit about that maybe a little later. So we're going to delve into what the product backlog is. Jira is the tool that we use at Taazaa. We're going to talk about that hierarchical model and how that may shift from tool to tool. Key areas for Agile to succeed. We've talked about those a little bit, and it all comes down to what are the values? Are we following those values and the principles and the pillars? We're going to talk about what a roadmap looks like in Jira. If you're using some other tool, no doubt they have something, some feature function that you can use as a roadmap. The controversial part of this is going to be discussing velocity versus capacity. It's a tool. We'll get into that, because that different people use it for different things. Again, I will always say any metric, any tool that we use that brings data should go to the team to help the team understand where they are and what they're delivering. We're going to talk about some of the metric reporting included in Jira. I always crack up when I see this because I've seen this, not literally, but I've seen this happen a few times where priorities, right? Walls are no longer the priority. The client wants painting done first. When we talk about strategic planning and we talk about our roadmap, there is a discussion and sometimes hard conversations about what is valuable to the product and which value item comes first or should come first. Planning includes identifying any business priorities, dependencies, known impediments, whether it be business or technical. We need to understand that while item A may bring more value, but we can't deliver that until certain external dependencies are resolved. So until those are resolved, let's pick up item B, feature B. We can deliver that. It can deliver value while we're waiting for the blockers to be removed for item A. That we can do that shift. Delivering large products, we want to think big. We want to start small. We want to learn fast. There will be failure points. We want to learn from those quickly. But we don't want to get caught up in analysis paralysis, right? Pick something, pick it so that it's large enough to deliver. We deliver value, we move to the next one. Okay, move to the next item. The product backlog. The product backlog is the responsibility, first and foremost, to the product owner. And as we look at the product backlog, if you look at this graphic here, those items further to the bottom of this graphic could be ideas, initiatives, thoughts that stakeholders have considered and they think it will bring value to the product sometime in the future. It's not necessarily been completely thought out, but it's an idea, something they just want to put out there to say, hey, we're going to think about this more. We still have to derive. Does it bring value? How can we determine the ROI on this? Maybe they haven't considered that yet. It's just a business idea, thought, something around that they want to get through. They think they want to put it on the product backlog. As we get into the center area where it talks about release 2, these are items now that, okay, we have our initiative, we have this grand idea, this broad thought. Now there are features or epics from a JIRA perspective within that initiative that we want to break out. If we think about a feature of a product, any product that pops into your mind, think about a feature. That feature or that epic was not delivered overnight, not the complete feature. We want to be able to break down the delivery of each of those features so that we can say incrementally, we can deliver this smaller piece. It'll be available to customers. It'll be available. And it's going to bring value as we continue to build on that sprint over sprint until we complete that feature or that epic. And as we get into where it shows there, release 1, these are now the definition of work item requests, stories, if you will. This is where there's been enough refinement at the feature level, at the initiative level, that these stories have been broken out and defined, and they're now being presented to the team for review. This is where we identify if there are any technical blockers, any business impediments that might stop us from getting that. They need to have an understanding of that work so that they can determine what needs to get done in a timely manner. And those items at the very top, the highest priority items, have been determined, and those are going into the sprint plan. Those go into negotiations with the product owner and the team because they've been thoroughly vetted by the product owner, by the business analyst, by the development team, and they understand how much complexity is involved in the work, and they can commit to, we can get this done. So those items at the bottom have the least amount of definition. Those items at the top are prepared and ready to be planned for sprint. Maybe half of them are planned in the next sprint, N+1. Maybe a third of them are planned in a sprint N+2. The product owner is totally responsible for the product backlog, including its visibility to others, the content, availability, and the ordering, the prioritization of the work that's in there. The product backlog is never complete. If there's a product, we have a product, we have a product backlog. Let's see, and there are items, minimal items, I'll say, should be a description, the order, the priority, the estimated value, and the estimate on the actual stories that we'll get to. We'll talk about scoring of stories. Next, These are key areas that help Scrum to succeed. And again, these items are simple on the outskirt, much like the Scrum Guide and the Agile Manifesto. On the outside, these are simple, right? There are 5 bullets, but it's the actual implementation of these things that make it difficult sometimes. I can read something and say, yeah, I understand that. Implementing it with human beings, with people, can sometimes be a challenge. So there's planning, first and foremost. Constant, collaborative, prioritization is probably the single most difficult thing product owners face. When you have multiple stakeholders who have competing priorities. Transparency. Be transparent, total transparency, good, bad, or indifferent. Communications. That goes along with transparency and collaboration. Always be open to collaborating across the organization. The more operations understand the challenges that IT faces, the better the collaboration will go. The Jira hierarchy. Again, this is specific to Jira, whatever tool you're using, and I've used TFS before, back when it was TFS. Similar model, but I think they called epics features. So we have the initiative, the largest, broadest idea of the work that's defined, maybe not clearly understood yet. Each initiative should have at least one, but one or more epics or features associated with it. And that relationship drives. As we work through this hierarchy, you'll note that there are relationships between each of these types. The epic is a more narrower definition of what the initiative is and how that breaks out. Each epic should have one or more stories associated with it. That relationship aligns those stories with the epic or that feature. The stories are even more refined to detail what this work item request, this specific work item request, is expected to deliver so that it delivers value. And then we have subtasks that are associated with the work item request, or the stories. Those are specifically created by the team members, the developers, to outline, to highlight parts of what needs to get done from, say, a technical perspective. Do we need a database table? Do we need additional columns added to an existing table? Do we need to have a SQL script? Those are specific to the development team to determine, to outline the work that has to get done within a story or work item. This is an example of a Jira roadmap. Again, we talk about the Jira roadmap and how it lays out over a period of time, weeks, months, the work that's defined. This is a tool primarily for the product owner to identify the work items, the epics, the stories that will bring value, and when the expectation is for those to get delivered at a high level. There are shifts in priorities that happen to this on a regular basis. Okay, this is the challenging topic. So velocity versus capacity. We're going to talk through this quickly. And again, if there are questions about this, please put it in the Q&A section. And if we need further discussion, I'm happy to reach out or have you reach out to me for more detailed discussion. So velocity is a measurement of the amount of story points delivered across a given time period. And we'll get into what does that mean. Capacity is the amount of time, development time, available for it within a given sprint. And we'll see how there are two methods or two tools we can use to estimate the delivery of value for teams. Both of these are metrics based on the concept of relative estimation or forecasting. It's important to note that. Again, I use these tools to provide information and insight to the development team, not to report up to leadership that says, hey, team X is doing, 30 points and team Y is only doing 25. That's not what this is about. This is to present to the team. We're going to get into this a little bit more. So I'm just going to go ahead and go to forecasting velocity based on sprint history. One of the ways to try to forecast as a tool to try to forecast what a team's capable of is to look at the history of their delivery. One of the things we want to aim for is consistent delivery of value. We don't want teams, if any of you have any type of electronics background, I always go to an example of a sine wave. We don't want teams doing this. We don't want teams delivering 150 points one sprint, 30 points the next, 200 points the third sprint. We want consistent delivery of value. That makes it so much more consistent and for planning purposes, right? If you have a team that can deliver 50 points plus or minus 5 points every sprint consistently, we can plan for that. We can plan historical sprints. We can plan, not historical, future sprints for that. We can say, we know the team is capable of delivering this. Therefore, we can plan out 2 or 3 sprints for that delivery. Helps with the forecasting. Helps to better understand what value can we get over the next 2 or 3 sprints. So we'll take this example. This example, sprints A through E. I look here at the highlighted area is just looking at the last 3 sprints. And I basically take the average of those. Average comes out to 50.667. I round it down to 50. That's great. It gives you an idea, a forecast, something that you can try to plan for. What this doesn't include and doesn't give you insight to, and you can, again, you can estimate as best you can, but this does not provide you insight into the next sprint. We have a holiday and we have 2 team members that are taking half the sprint off. How do we account for that in this? You could say, okay, 50 points divided by X number of team members. That gives us approximately, whatever that number would be. There is another tool. There's another way to try to take a look at this. And this one, we're calculating capacity based on hours. How do we determine what teams can deliver consistently? Daily capacity per team member, we're saying is 6.5. As part of that 6.5 hours, we're trying to take into consideration daily meetings, events, things that detract from the developers actually doing their job. So we're basically saying on a daily basis, we expect that an hour to hour and a half of time will be distraction times, meetings, or whatever, for team members. The team's maximum capacity is how much time, if every team member was available at 6.5 hours per sprint day, what's the maximum amount of time that we have for that? And essentially you have the grid to the right. We have 6 team members, 5 team members. If each team member was available all 10 days of the sprint, at 6.5, we'd come up with 325 hours. That's our maximum available capacity. If we look at that grid, though, we can see that Bob is out for 2 days of the sprint. Cynthia is taking PTO, she's out for half the sprint. And Emily is taking 1 day off. So if we look at that, it only gives us 273 hours within that sprint. That's what we have to work with to try to plan. Calculating the velocity based on that is looking at our average velocity. Again, I have here the 4 previous sprints instead of 3. I usually use 3. But looking at that, our average velocity is 34. And you can see the calculation there. If we take the average velocity divided by the maximum available capacity, which is 325, times the sprint capacity, which is 273, we come up with 28.56 rounded up to 29 points that we could plan for. Again, these are all relative scoring models that we want to look at. This is a screenshot of a burn down chart for one of the product teams that I support. I use this tool 2 to 3 times during the sprint to give the team visibility to what the overall delivery looks like. Does our product owner have access to this and can see it? Absolutely. Our product owner is on the stand up or on the daily scrum with us. So when it is displayed, they see it. Even if they're not on the daily scrum, they can pull this up to see it. My goal in building a team is to present this to the team so that they have access and have visibility. We don't want them to be so close to the forest that they miss the trees. We want to give them a bigger picture of what the delivery looks like in the sprint. I have seen this where teams will go just a straight line across to the very last 2 or 3 days of the sprint, and then there's this big cliff of a drop off. Why is that happening? That's the question we want to ask the team. Why is that happening? So that they can fix the problem. There is a problem. Maybe they discuss it in the next retrospective. This is another tool. This is a velocity chart that shows historical data of delivery. This is what I was talking about, consistent delivery of a Scrum team. And you can see here the committed work versus the completed work and the consistency of that going across 6 or 7 sprints. This helps with planning. We can look at this and it already shows us that the average is 119 points. Is that something we could plan for in the next sprint as we go into our sprint planning? Absolutely. We could look at that. We could take into consideration any holidays, PTO, any sick time that someone has a medical procedure that they have to take off for. This is a tool that can be used. We're going to talk about servant leadership now. I talked earlier about how servant leadership encompasses everything we've covered, from the Agile mindset to the use of Scrum as a delivery tool. So I'm going to go through the traits of historical top-down leadership. We're going to talk about servant leadership traits, what those mean. And then there's a servant leadership in business. There's a paper that's used by a local university here. And I'll get more into that. Traditional top-down leadership traits include domineering. Leaders expected to understand and have all the knowledge of what's happening. accepts little or no input. They're demanding, dictates teams and processes, doesn't empower the teams to control those. Somewhat arrogant at times, power driven, creates overly structured or rigid environments. The unfortunate thing is, I am sure that some of us have run into these types of leaders. I've had probably, there are 10 or less leaders in my history of working in 30 years that stand out to me as just the opposite. I probably had one or two that meet this criteria, but 10 or less that fall within these traits as servant leaders. Those people a few years ago, when I first started truly studying servant leadership, I sent a message to them. I kind of put a post out there within LinkedIn, thanking them for providing me insight of what it truly means to be a leader and a servant leader. They're respectful, humble, collaborative, empathetic, empowering, and trusting. Key points. They're present, they're available, they listen actively, curious about what's going on. And I'll get into that a little bit more here when I'm talking about the paper. Comfortable being uncomfortable. I've had people ask me, Jeff, what does that mean? Servant leaders don't come with all the answers. They look to their people to bring the problems and to bring the answers. They may provide guidance, but they don't expect to understand and know every solution. That's why they hire intelligent people. They provide guidance, not directives. And they're adaptive to what shifts that come their way. So, servant leadership in business. This was a paper I mentioned earlier. There's a local university here that my wife works for, in full disclosure. She is the manager for the online master's program. And they require, as part of their required reading for that program, this paper. They have a workshop that's entitled Servant Leadership. And this paper, which I have it, we go through it here, but if you want more details around this, with Dr. Kent Keith's 2009 paper, it's a great document to go read. The gist of this paper is what we'll go through with this. His belief was that organizations exist to serve people. They make money so they can continue to grow and serve in service of others. And he talked about key practices of servant leadership: listening, changing the pyramid instead of top down, have the bottom up approach, let ideas flow up. Developing your people, coaching, not controlling. We've seen that earlier. Unleashing the energy and intelligence of your people, empowering them to take the initiative. When listening, don't begin with the answer. Don't start with understanding. I already know what you're going to say. Here's the program, or here's the solution, or the procedure that you need to implement to do that. Give the respect, give the ability for them to express not only the challenge or the problem, but to come to you with options or choices about what the solution is. Howard Bear wrote in his book, Compassionate Listening, about compassionate listening. Compassionate listening involves listening with compassion and understanding, but not coming with any preconceived notions. Caring, but empty of opinions. I know that can be difficult at times. I had a business analyst, very smart, understood the product better than anyone on the team. She came to me once and she said, Jeff, I don't understand. The team members like me, but they don't really respect me. And I said to her, I said, you've said to me many times, one thing that you hate most that people do when you're talking. What is that? Cut me off. I said, look, you're very intelligent, very smart. The team does respect your knowledge. But you do to them what you hate having done to you. What I would coach you to do is present information about the next upcoming feature or epic that we want to introduce to the team. Sit back and let them walk through what the challenges are, what things that they see. Literally take note of what they're talking about. And as you hear them answer those questions, scratch through your note. If you have any notes left, then you bring that up. Guys, I noticed that you asked all these questions. That's great. I still have answers to a couple of these questions that weren't answered. But let them finish. Let them get through the questions. Don't cut them off. Don't go in with a solution. Shifting the pyramid, changing the pyramid, instead of top down, let's make it from bottom up, right? There's a shift that we want to look at here. We want team-driven ideas, servant leadership, strong relationships. Think back about the Agile principles, how we respect our team members, comprehensive requirements, shared accountability. We all own what's happening, good, bad, or indifferent. We own this. And what's the business objective? What's the value that's driving this? It should not just come down from the top. This is what we want. What's the ROI? Teams work better when they understand themselves why they're doing this. Another story just popped into my head about this very topic. Another BA, brilliant. As part of a review, sprint review, she literally talked about what the impact was of a feature that was completed and how the delivery of that would reduce the amount of time it took a patient. Patients, for instance, would go to a hospital, wouldn't have their records. And this feature that was included would now they could go in with their driver's license, input that information, and it would pull back the information that quick. She laid that out so well, what the business objective was, because she understood that at the beginning. So she explained that to the team of what the value was that this feature was going to be and how it impacted our members at the time. The second bullet point here is Dr. Keith talked about how you can please your boss. They can please their boss, and they can please the board or directors, but without anyone really paying attention to the wants and needs of the customer. Everybody that delivered or think we delivered is happy except the customer. Inverting that pyramid helps everyone focus on the customer. Another trait that we want to focus on is developing your people. He talked about this company, TDI Industries, that in 2009 was one of the top companies in America, best companies in America. And his focus was on their mission statement. And their mission statement basically said, we are committed to providing outstanding career opportunities by exceeding our customer expectations through continuous aggressive improvement. Not about sales, not specifically, it's about serving our customers. He noted that the mission statement was focused on providing opportunity for its people. You have happy people, excited to come in and do their work. They'll create a better product for you. Coaching, not controlling. Constantly coaching and mentoring is the best way to develop your people, not the top-down management style of giving orders, constantly telling people what to do. What happens if you're on PTO, you're on vacation, and something happens, and because your teams are so used to you telling them what to do, they don't know how to put the left foot in front of the right. They don't know what the next step is. You open up failure points by being so directive, so prescriptive about the work, not allowing your team members to be empowered to take chances and take risks. It's better to make sure that people understand the needs, what needs to be done, why it needs to be done, and that they're willing and able to do it. And the best way to do this is by coaching, mentoring, engaging your teams, your team members. Here are some references that I've used to help me create the content here. First and foremost is the Agile Manifesto and the Scrum Guide. The Scrum Guide, Agile Manifesto, I think I mentioned earlier, is 1, maybe 2 pages. The Scrum Guide is less than 20 and can probably be read initially, I'll say initially, within a half hour or so. I would be careful, and I actually read the Scrum Guide 2 to 3 times a year as a refresher and to have a different perspective based on the experiences I've had with the product teams that I support. Servant Leadership in Business, Dr. Keith's paper, 2009 paper. The Servant as a Leader, Robert Greenleaf, as a book that I'm in the process of reading right now. I think Mr. Greenleaf was the first person who coined the term servant leader. So it'd be good to know what his initial thoughts were on that. And then these 2 books, yes. Joseph Michelli, The Starbucks Experience, 5 Principles of Turning Ordinary into Extraordinary. And It's Not the Coffee, Leadership Principles from the Life at Starbucks by Howard Baer. That concludes the presentation. It looks like we do have a few questions. So I will take a look and see what we have here. Umair Hassan, in the sprint planning call, should we count the time the Scrum ceremony is planning the sprint? Should we count the time the Scrum ceremony and planning the sprint? Those are 2 separate events. Ideally, if you're having sprint planning, you should have your daily Scrum and possibly then your sprint planning, or in some cases, on the day that you have your sprint planning, there's not a daily Scrum. If you want to go into your planning, I think is maybe what you're asking, if you're going into your sprint planning, should you start with your daily Scrum? Sure. This is one of those cautionary things that the Scrum Guide is not prescriptive in how we do these things. It merely suggests as a guide that these things need to happen to make sure that there's a flow of communication about the product and the delivery. This is something where you could have your daily Scrum to start your planning and move right into your sprint planning. That would help because you know at the end of your sprint planning was everything that was included in the sprint completed. I would say for teams that I support, I would keep them as two separate events myself. Makes planning and setting those up easier. Let's see. Martha Hill, what's the difference between release and sprint? Is increment the same as a release? Yeah, yes. I was asked this question by a QA manager this morning, actually. My view on this, there's no reason. What the Scrum Guide says is that the increment or the sprint, the work that's included in the sprint, should be releasable, right? It is the product owner determination as if it is released, if it is deployed. It should be deployable, not released. Should be deployable. Release to me says, okay, this has been deployed from the development environment to the UAT environment, and now we want to release it out into production. That is an action based on the product owner's view of the work. Were there defects found, and is there something that in that release, in that planned release, that could be pulled out so it doesn't affect anything else? Deploy, the work should be deployed when the team finishes a sprint, deploy to the next environment, or I would presume is UAT, so it can be tested by users. Release, there's nothing within Scrum that restricts the release of work. When it's released to production, the assumption is that it's passed all tests, both at the Scrum team level and at the UAT environment, and it can be released at any given time. Should we work on multiple epics in parallel? What's the recommendation? Chitin, or if I messed your name up there. You can. I would caution, and I've seen this historically. When you're juggling multiple things, nothing really, you churn, nothing really gets completed. If you can work with your product owner, or if you're the product owner, if you can focus the team's actions on completing one or two features or epics within a sprint or two, I think that drives more value. The team can then focus on those one or two things rather than being spread out across multiple items. That becomes a challenge. That's why the product owners get paid to be product owners, because they have to work with stakeholders to determine if we can focus on delivering this feature, this epic, is the value delivery of that greater than having nothing get completed while we work across 5 different things? So I would caution focusing on 1 or 2, no more than 2 features or epics for a single team. You have better value delivery across that. Next, I have for a sprint that lasts 30 days. There is work we know that will last longer than a sprint due to outside resources and dependencies on stakeholders. What is a suggestion to outline this work? For a sprint that lasts longer than 30 days, there's work we know that will last longer than the sprint. So work that goes beyond the sprint. And there are outside dependencies for the work and dependencies on stakeholders. I'm going to go back to what I discussed earlier about having known dependencies and bringing that work into a sprint. I would say you put your team at risk, and the team should feel empowered to put a halt to that, right? We don't want to put our teams at risk of failing because it's a known failure point. And it's something, if it's an external dependency, it's something that we can't really control. We have no control of external resources and when they can deliver. So if I ask my team, and regardless of whether it's a 30-day sprint or a 2-week sprint, if I bring work to the team and I say, hey, this is going to involve an external resource, and I don't know when they're going to deliver their part, I'm putting them in a position to fail. And again, it doesn't matter if it's 2 weeks or 30 days. I should not want, as a product owner, I should not bring that work to the team until those dependencies have been resolved. I can't plan successfully for that to be completed during the sprint. So I don't want to put the team in a position to fail by asking them to take it on with the hope that those external resources are going to finish the work in a timely manner. And the dependency on stakeholders, again, as a product owner, it's incumbent on the product owner to discuss any dependencies with the stakeholders. And if they, in fact, are the blockers, that is for the product owner to bring up in a tough conversation. I understand this is valuable to the product. I understand it would bring great value if we could deliver this over the next 30 days. I can't plan for this because there are certain items or certain things that we need from you as a stakeholder before we can accept this in. Otherwise, I can bring it in, the team's going to fail, it's not going to make you happy. Which brings to another point. I had this conversation with one of our product teams recently about when to deliver bad news. Nobody likes it. Nobody likes getting it. Nobody likes bringing bad news. But product owners and stakeholders, while they're not going to be happy, they're going to be even more upset if they find that I knew that there was a failure point early in the sprint, but I just didn't bring it to them, didn't present it to them as a possible failure point to delivery until the last day or two of the sprint. That doesn't give anybody the opportunity to mitigate those risks. I was just working on it. I thought I could get it resolved. That communication should have been done. Remember, communication, transparency, good, bad, or indifferent, should be brought up immediately. So the product owner is responsible here for reducing the risk that the team would be impacted by during the sprint. My suggestion is that if there are third-party dependencies, that work is not included in the sprint until we know for certain those dependencies or those blockers, sounds like, have been cleared. We have, looks like one more that says, please give some information about the burn down chart on Azure DevOps. I unfortunately don't use Azure DevOps. I think Azure DevOps was transitioned from TFS, but I've not used it since that transition. If you'd like, please reach out to me. I'm happy to help you figure out what that burn down chart looks like in Azure DevOps. That I would assume that there is a reporting system that allows you to see the burn down. If not, again, reach out to me. I can help you calculate what that might look like in your sprints. Okay, let's see. I think that's all the questions we had. I want to thank you all for attending. Thank you for your time. I would like to give a quick shout out. I know they're not on here, but I always feel it's necessary to thank those team members that helped me pull this all together. So our marketing team within Taazaa, our graphics team helped pull all of this together. I provided the content. Our technical writer helped to review this. I appreciate everything that those team members helped to get this done. There's my contact information, my email address from Taazaa, and my LinkedIn profile. So please feel free to reach out. If you want to have further discussions about some of these questions, I'm happy to have those discussions. I'm passionate about this. I'm passionate about building teams and helping them to deliver greater value in a timely manner. All right. Thank you all for your time. Greatly appreciate it.